Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Galvin. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of Legal Aid Chicago. Welcome all of you to the second year of our doing an 8-part webinar series focusing on the legal needs of our client populations, in particular those people living in poverty. And if you are one of the over 1,000 people who attended our webinar series last year when we launched this series, welcome back. As you will learn today, and over the course of this year's series, we have an access to justice crisis in Chicago and in Cook County and in Illinois. The reality is that for those living in poverty, the Supreme Court's promise of equal justice for all has not yet been satisfied. During this series, you'll learn about this crisis and the ways that our staff and those working with us here at Legal Aid Chicago are responding. Today's session will explore the legal needs of victims of trafficking. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. So we're joined by Shayna Fuller from our community partner, the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force. Shayna will be giving an overview of our collaboration with her team on trafficking issues. We're also joined by my colleagues from Legal Aid Chicago. First, Anna Maitland, who's a supervisory attorney in our Immigrants and Workers' Rights Practice Group. Jose Soto from our Public Benefits Practice Group team, and Janelle Pedroza, a supervisory social worker in our Client Support Services work group. That's our social work group. So I'll now turn it over to Anna to get us started, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks so much for the introduction, John. Let me start my video. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As John introduced me, my name is Anna Maitland. I'm the supervisory attorney for the Trafficking Survivors Assistance Project. And we're really excited to have you here to learn a little bit more about the work we do to support the survivors that we work with. So I'm going to give a brief introduction about trafficking and talk a little bit about the legal definition and some of the legal needs that we see in survivors. Then we'll move into a case study, and Jose Soto will talk more about benefits, public benefits specifically for the survivors we work with, but additionally other survivors that are qualified through Illinois specifically. And then we'll move into holistic models. Legal Aid Chicago partners with many different organizations, and we really believe that the holistic model is the best for our trafficking survivor clients. And part of that is that we collaborate closely with the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force. And then finally, we'll go into some of the trauma-informed approaches and interviews, and then we'll open it up to questions. So what is human trafficking? Well, there's a lot of myths and questions about human trafficking and a lot of ideas. So we're going to do some myth busting first. The first one is that sex trafficking is the only form of trafficking. That is false. Many of us are aware of trafficking through movies like Taken or television shows like Big Sky. And those show trafficking as bringing in young girls from other countries or kidnapping young girls from this country and selling them into sex slavery. That does occur, but it is very, very rare. The majority of trafficking is actually labor trafficking. And the definition of trafficking is compelling or coercing a person to provide labor or commercial sex acts. Next slide. Okay, so human trafficking, another myth is that human trafficking is a crime that always involves crossing state or international borders. This is also false. This can happen within families. We see this happening with people reporting that they've seen something happening to their neighbors. You don't have to be you don't have to you don't have to move at all in order for trafficking to occur. The next myth is that trafficking victims are always undocumented. This is also false. Trafficking victims are citizens, they're non-citizens, they have visas, some of them are undocumented. Trafficking can happen to anybody. It can happen to the very old, it can happen to the very young, and it can happen to citizens, non-citizens, immigrants, with visas and without. So another myth is that many people falsely claim to be trafficking survivors. So if you're talking to a trafficking survivor, then we need to get as much detail as possible about their trafficking to make sure it's true. Janelle, is this true?
This isn't true. And one of the things that we work to do here at Legal Aid Chicago is to make sure that our services are client focused. And we go in with the assumption, especially at the beginning, that the client is telling us the truth and trying to figure out what has happened.
Thank you. Another myth is that immigrants can never access public benefits. Jose, is this true?
This is not true. Although generally it is true that people have to have some sort of status, either become a legal permanent resident or be a citizen in order to get most public benefits. There are always exceptions to this rule, and there are a lot of exceptions specifically in the state of Illinois, one of which we'll get into later in the presentation.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to walk through the rest of the presentation through the lens of a hypothetical. This hypothetical is loosely based off of a client that I've been working closely with, along with help from Janelle and Jose, and also partners at the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force. We'll also talk to you about a few other cases throughout to help really make these examples clearer, but we thought a hypo would really help. So a typical case, like the one that is described in this hypo, is somebody would reach out to us. In this case, it was a nurse at a local clinic, and she let us know that a young woman named Antigua had come to them for medical assistance, that Antigua is Spanish speaking only, and that she told them that she used to live with her ex-boyfriend and his aunt. She had to work a lot, and sometimes the aunt would take her to other areas to do more work. When she did not want to work, the ex-boyfriend would beat her. She also had a child with the ex-boyfriend, and he often threatened to take the child away from her if she left. While fleeing the situation, the aunt took the child, and Antigua has not seen her child since. She's very upset and very scared. So the nurse has identified this as a form of domestic violence and wants to see if we can help. But the question is could this also be trafficking? To identify whether this is trafficking, we need to go through an analysis. We typically go through what's called the AMP analysis, which is we look at the action, the means, and the purpose. The action, the very first step, is pretty much the easiest to identify. It just asks, what action did the trafficker take to initiate the trafficking? So did they recruit the person? Did they harbor the person? Did they transport the person, right? What was the initial action? And then we look at means and purpose. Purpose is pretty obvious, right? Was the person brought in to do domestic work? Are they a nanny? Are they being forced to work on a farm? It's usually some form of involuntary servitude. Is there a very large sum of money being held over their head that they just can never seem to pay back? And they keep on working and working and paying this person, but the interest keeps on rising, and somehow they keep on having more late fees. It's a form of debt bondage. We don't really see anything that would rise to the level of being called slavery, but we have also had clients who were forced to provide sexual services in exchange for money that was then provided to the trafficker themselves. So that would be commercial sex. Next slide. Oh, sorry. So the main thing that we look at, though, is the means: force, fraud, and coercion. So whenever we're trying to identify, is this a trafficking case, we look at whether there was force, fraud, or coercion in the case. And oftentimes we see all three. Force could include things like kidnapping, physical violence, sexual assault, drugging, isolation and confinement, verbal abuse, and threats. We very rarely see kidnapping, but isolation is a very common tactic that traffickers use, as is verbal abuse and threats, which actually ties directly into the coercive part, which can include things like threats of serious harm or restraint against a person. It doesn't have to be an actual physical action, it can just be threats. Coercion can also include actions intended to make a person believe that failure to perform could lead to serious harm or restraint against any person. So it could be their friends or their family. This is also something that can be very personal to the survivor themselves. So if it's somebody who very deeply believes that getting a divorce is a sin and that it would harm their family's reputation and their family's livelihood and life, and therefore they keep doing things that the trafficker requires because of the threat of divorce, that is sufficient to be considered a form of coercion. The most common form of coercion we see is abuse or threatened abuse of the legal system. So I'm going to call immigration on you. I'm going to call the police on you. A lot of our clients don't have a very clear knowledge of the law, and these threats are very scary to them. And then fraud is constantly used. It's often used to in the action portion of inciting trafficking, but it's often also used to make people continue working for them. So there's promises that things will get better. They'll start paying them eventually. There's fraud in whether or not the survivor believes that the trafficker actually loves them and is going to marry them and treat them better than they currently are. Next slide. So some of the things we do when we first see a client is we try to assess what we see externally with the client. Is the client homeless, or are they living with others? When they come for an interview or when we talk to them over the phone, is there always somebody with them? And how engaged in them answering questions is that person? Do they seem isolated or withdrawn? And are they undocumented? Undocumented is often a really, if a person's undocumented, it's often a tool that traffickers use as a way to increase their power over a survivor. And then we ask the client questions like, do they actually know their address? And if they are working or have worked, are they currently living with their employer? Does the employer control their movements? Have they ever been injured on the job and had to continue working? Do they get paid? And if they get paid, do they get paid adequately? We have people who have been made to work 120-hour weeks and paid $250 for a whole week's worth of work. And you might be surprised to hear that they were paid, but trafficking, remember, is not about whether or not someone's paid. It's whether they're forced, fraud, or coerced into one of the types of work. So involuntary servitude would be is probably the most common that we see. Do they have identity documents? Oftentimes the trafficker will take and keep the documents. And then are they afraid? Are they afraid of talking to law enforcement, or have they been tricked into continuing to work? So what are some of the questions that we're going to ask Antigua? We're not really clear yet about her situation, so we might want to get to more questions about the kind of work that she was talking about, the kinds of threats that she was talking about, whether she gets paid for her work, what are her work hours. So after asking more questions, you learned that Antigua had to clean the whole home, cook, care for the aunt's 4 children, and do anything else the aunt demanded. The aunt would also take her to clean other houses and other properties. The aunt was always in control of those circumstances. And sometimes Antigua had to work from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. She never got paid for any of this. When she did complain, she would be beaten, and sometimes food would be withheld from both Antigua and her daughter. Antigua and her child lived on the floor of the basement, and they were often sick from the cold. You also learned that Antigua does not have immigration status, and they used her lack of English, her lack of knowledge of the law, and the fact that she did not have any documents to threaten her, so she would have to continue to work. So is this trafficking? Next slide. Probably. I would say it is. We see that there's the elements of physical and emotional abuse. We see that there's a lot of coercion, right? There's threats to call immigration. There's threats to take away her child. That's a huge one. There's a pattern of isolation, violence, and use of language barriers to make Antigua believe she'd be harmed if she does not do what she's told, and to believe that her daughter will be harmed. And indeed, her daughter is not given food when Antigua doesn't do as she's told. So it's not just something she believes, she's seen it happen. And it's for the purpose of involuntary servitude. So she had to cook, clean, take care of the children for the aunt. And she also had to cook and clean, and well, she also had to clean for other households and properties. She's never paid, and she had no control over the work. She was harbored, she was obtained, and she was transported. And I think it's really important to point out that the aunt and the ex clearly had full control over the work, when she worked, where she worked, and the finances associated with that. So we've identified that she's a trafficking survivor. What are some of the needs that she might have? Well, we would identify her as somebody who might need immigration relief. Many of our trafficking survivors need divorce and custody representation. Some of them need help with name changes, and many of them also have the potential for a civil case. This could be a FALISA or some other form of employment case against the trafficker, where they could try and reclaim some of the wages that they were never paid. They may also need counseling services, medical services, help obtaining housing or help keeping housing, help getting employment, or help with disputes that they're having at work. Many of our clients are severely traumatized and are continuing to have issues at work and may be subject to repeat trafficking. And navigating law enforcement. If they're still afraid, or even for the purpose of some of the forms of relief that they have, they may need to report the trafficker to law enforcement, or they may already be involved in a criminal case and need help navigating that system. And the list goes on. So what are some of the services that Antigua could qualify for? Well, probably immigration, right? And housing, because we know that she's homeless. We know that she may need public benefits because she's living in a shelter and it doesn't appear that she has a job. If she does go to the law enforcement, she may need victim advocacy to help navigate that, but also if she's trying to reach out around custody issues. She may need a lawyer who can help navigate both of the cases. She may need medical needs, counseling, custody issues. In our service, though, we tend to really, we would provide all of those at Legal Aid Chicago, or we would help to we would help her to get a different attorney through one of our many practice groups. For instance, we often work closely with the family law and with public benefits. Next slide. So if we identified, so one of the core needs that many of our trafficking survivors have is immigration. There's an immigration visa called a T non-immigrant visa, which is a humanitarian visa, which is specifically for trafficking survivors. And one of the requirements is that survivor has to have reported the trafficking to law enforcement, distinct from other forms of humanitarian visas like the U visa, where law enforcement has to provide a certification. There is no requirement that the law enforcement provide a certification, but she, Antigua in this case, or any of our other trafficking survivors would have to have at least reported the circumstances and participated in any form of investigation that law enforcement would want to do. If law enforcement decides to do a full investigation, the survivor may be eligible for a work permit. If their T visa is granted, they could get a 4-year visa. They're eligible for certain waivers, things like entry without inspection if it's tied to the trafficking. And they can apply for their spouse, for unmarried children under 21, or if the trafficking survivor is under 21, then they could apply for their parents. Another thing that we really love being able to refer our clients to is public benefits.
All right, So we've been, the Public Benefits Practice Group in Legal Aid Chicago has been working a lot recently with IWR to get a lot of people that are already being served by us for trafficking or other immigration services to also possibly look into the possibility of them getting public benefits. Normally, as I mentioned before, you have to have some sort of legal status, either be a legal permanent resident or a US citizen in order to qualify for public benefits. But there are a lot of exceptions at the state level because each state manages the public benefits differently. In Illinois specifically, there is a big program that exists only in Illinois called the Victims of Trafficking, Torture, or Other Serious Crimes Program, also known as VTTC. Normally, in order for a trafficking victim to qualify for public benefits, they need to apply for a T visa and get approved. Once they're approved, they can receive normal public benefits that come funded by the federal government. However, the VTTC program opens up eligibility for certain public benefits for people that are preparing to apply or have applied for T visa, haven't been approved yet. So there can, the timing of the approval process for T visa is variable, but this means that the person that's been a victim of trafficking can get certain benefits while they're waiting for a decision to be made by immigration. So the VTTC program is not just for people that have been victims of trafficking. They're for anyone that is applying for U visa protections, T visa protections, or protections under asylum laws. But of course, we're talking specifically today about trafficking victims. It's not just the people that are asking for protections under these immigration laws, but it can also apply to their derivatives. So it can be a parent, a child, and a sibling under 18 also can possibly qualify under this program while the T visa application is waiting to be approved. The benefits generally are modeled after the federal programs that already exist, like the food stamp program, cash assistance, or medical services, Medicaid. But they are entirely funded by the state of Illinois. So the first of these benefits is, if we can go to the next slide. The first of these programs is called VTTC Food Assistance, and this is modeled after the federal food stamp program or the SNAP program. It's money to buy food so that you can feed your family. It's issued on a link card, which is similar to the one we have on screen here. And the benefit amount, the amount of money that people can get from this program varies depending on the individual situation. There is a general cutoff point of 165% of the federal poverty line, but the calculation is more complicated than that. The biggest benefit of this program is, of course, providing people with a way to eat healthy food, which may or may not be available depending on a person's situation. The second type of benefit that's available from the VTTC program is called cash assistance. And it's money that's meant to be used in any way. So, while food assistance generally is for buying food, cash assistance can be used to pay for anything. It can cover rent. It can buy clothes, diapers, anything that isn't normally able to be paid for by food assistance. The amounts may not seem very high, as you can see from the chart here, which is the most current one, but it can mean the difference between someone moving out of a shelter, moving out of an unstable living situation. Again, it's generally modeled after the cash assistance that already exists at the federal level called TANF, but it can be used to buy anything. So it's very useful. The third type of VTTC benefit is VTTC medical assistance. The federal program is called Medicaid, and it's modeled after one of the Medicaid programs, specifically the one called AABD Medicaid, which was the original Medicaid or the Medicaid before the Affordable Care Act expanded access to people. So it's capped at 100% of the federal poverty line, which is not very high, but specifically with people that have been victims of trafficking, they may have a lot of medical issues that have gone untreated because they have no access to healthcare. That could be one of the ways in which, trafficking, people trafficking them have abused their power. So having people get access to health insurance can help them greatly. What are mixed status families? Like I mentioned, the VTTC program is for people that don't have status but are seeking status through one of the U visa, T visa, or asylum laws. Sometimes they may have children, and those children aren't necessarily undocumented. They may have a US citizen child. When people in a family have different statuses, that's what we call a mixed status family. So imagine Antigua, her child is a US citizen. Well, the citizen child may qualify for some benefits under the federal program, while Antigua under the regular federal rules would not. So if in these situations, when someone applies for VTTC benefit, the people in the household that may have status or may qualify under other programs get one case processed for all of the programs that they can get. After that, the VTTC program makes a second calculation and issues the difference between what the child alone can get and what everyone in the family can get under the VTTC rules. The differences between those benefit amounts get issued on the second link card. Something to mention about VTTC benefits that gets brought up a lot, especially by clients, is this issue of public charge. What is public charge? It's a series of rules that can affect someone that's trying to become a legal permanent resident. Specifically, it's and it became a big thing at during the last administration because the rules were about to be changed to become more strict. Something to note about VTTC benefits is that these benefits are entirely state funded. So the public charge rule is only for benefits that can be gotten through the federal public benefit rules. So VTTC is not a federal program, it's a state program, so it doesn't meet the qualifications of being considered under public charge. Even if it were, people that are asking for humanitarian relief like U visa, T visa, and asylum generally don't get the public charge rule affect them at all. So there's no risk of running into this public charge rule by getting VTTC benefits. What happens when the T visa application is approved? Well, people that get approved for T visas then qualify for public benefits under the federal rules. So they're no longer VTTC clients. Any cases that are open get transferred to a regular DHS office for processing. In the case of someone with a minor child, the cases would be merged and they would just have to manage one case for everyone in the family.
Thank you so much for that really excellent presentation, Jose. It's so important to our clients that they are able to access these benefits, and it really makes a big difference to their stability. But when we're talking about working on a more holistic service model, we also have to look for what the client wants, right? That should actually be the most important aspect of client-centered work. So in this hypo we're looking at, Antigua is not interested in talking about immigration yet. She wants her child away from the ex-boyfriend and the aunt. That is her primary focus. She's also living in a shelter right now and can only stay there for a little while longer. And she also talks about the threats that she's continuing to receive from her boyfriend. She's constantly afraid. Something that's really important to know about trafficking survivor programs is that there's a lot of funding for TVAP, which is the Trafficking Victims Assistance Projects, which provide additional housing and social work services for trafficking survivors. And there's also many different, both within the FBI, HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations, as well as police, and different US Department of Labor, Illinois Department of Labor, and many, many other law enforcement agencies, very trafficking specific working groups. So I'm going to hand this over to Janelle to talk more about how we provide a more holistic service model.
So as we have kind of demonstrated and talked about, we are, our clients come with a variety of complex histories of trauma, family systems, poverty, emotional needs, mental health issues, and lack of resources. And so what we've learned is that the legal issue doesn't occur in a vacuum. So with Antigua, we've talked a little bit about how her, the needs that she had were kind of broad. There are housing issues, there's multiple legal issues. And so what we do is we provide a really thorough assessment. So internally, we have kind of internal supports and external supports to kind of create this holistic model for our clients. Internally, we operate with this interdisciplinary attorney social work model. So we have a couple of social workers on staff that support the legal work of our attorneys and paralegals and the teams here. And the goal of the social workers are to increase our client stability, so they're self-sufficient and able to fully engage and be successful in their legal cases. And we do that. We consult with the attorneys that we're working with on the social work needs that our clients have. We have an assessment tool that we use to kind of do a thorough assessment that the attorneys get on their legal issues, and then we kind of fill in some gaps to see kind of what everything the client is facing. And then throughout the case, we're providing clinical support and case management just to kind of further support the client. And so with Antigua, we've talked a little bit about, she had housing needs, she had custody needs, she had immigration needs, she had all of the stuff that was going on. And when we're providing these holistic services and doing these assessments, it's a lot to take on all 10 issues at once. And so we work with our clients to identify, okay, where should we start? What are the urgent needs that you have right now? And so with Antigua, the biggest issue that she wanted to focus on at the beginning was the fact that she was not with her child. Her child was still with her trafficker and the aunt. And so that was kind of her biggest focus. And so kind of as from the legal perspective, we might have to put on hold the immigration case to really focus on what she feels like is the most urgent. And then we also have these external supports. And so that can include other legal services. So if there's a criminal case, if there's these custody issues, kind of what can we work on internally and what do we need like additional legal support for her? And then we also refer out to social services, government agencies, law enforcement, investigation departments. And so we're really trying to wrap services around Antigua, both internally and externally, to make sure that her needs are met. And so so I think there's one more slide. I think we're going to share the code for the CLE credits. And so the CLE code is 21 LAC 52. And so make sure you write that down. That will be required to include when you fill out the form that we've shared. So make sure you write that down, 21 LAC 52. And then to kind of further talk about some of these collaborations that we work with and the service and how we kind of are connected with services across the county, Shane is going to share a little bit more about the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force and share kind of about what those partnerships and what the collaboration looks like kind of beyond legal aid to fully serve our clients.
Awesome. Thank you, Janelle. Yeah, welcome everyone. Yeah, I'm just going to talk for a little bit about the task force here in Cook County. So the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force has been around. This is our 11th year. I have been with the task force for about 2.5 years. And so, yeah, if you can go to the next slide. So starting in 2010, the government initiated what they call the Enhanced Collaborative Model. And the point of that was to release funding from the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Office for Victims of Crime in order to fund human trafficking task forces around the country. And so ours here in Cook County started as a partnership between the State Attorney's Office, the Salvation Army Stop It program, which I work for. It's a case management program for survivors of labor and sex trafficking, and then the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. And so really the task force is multidisciplinary. And we're bringing together law enforcement, social service providers, legal service agencies to work on human trafficking cases together. We can go to the next slide. So here is our task force mission. So really what we aim to do is to combat human trafficking through seamless collaboration between law enforcement and social service providers. So instead of everyone kind of working in their own silos, really making sure that we are communicating with one another and working together, because that's what best serves survivors of this crime. We aim to use a victim-centered approach. I know Anna and some of the other folks that have spoken so far have mentioned, being client-centered. And so really what we mean by that is, as we're investigating, as we're trying to prosecute traffickers, we're really being survivor-centered and victim-centered. What is it that, survivors like the woman in our case study, Antigua, what is it that they want to do? And making sure we're focused on their needs and what they want to do moving forward. And then lastly, we aim to provide comprehensive, high-quality social services to all victims of human trafficking. And so to describe kind of the way the task force is structured, so we have a core team at the top, and that's made of our partners from the state attorney's office, so a victim witness specialist there, Mariana Planey, who's the assistant state attorney, and she's head of the human trafficking unit over there, myself, and Elise Dobney, who's the program manager of the Stop It program, and then Abigail Peluso from the U.S. Attorney's Office. So we kind of formed the core team at the top, and then we have a steering committee on our task force that is invitation only. And if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see all of the different organizations that are part of our steering committee. And so membership on our steering committee on the task force is decided upon by the core team. It's really based on, criterion, which includes, does this agency have experience in the anti-trafficking movement? What is their likelihood of engaging and encountering potential victims? Are they prepared to kind of comprehensively address this issue? And so, as you can see, the third column here under legal service providers, Legal Aid Chicago has been a part of our steering committee for a long time. Legal Aid Chicago does really great work and has been really instrumental in many cases when we've provided services to survivors who are in need of that assistance with the things that we've talked about so far. And so these are the subcommittees that exist on our task force. So underneath the steering committee, we have various subcommittees that are really focused on key issue areas that we've identified. And so these are open to relevant organizations and staff within them who are looking to help with anti-trafficking efforts in the area. So I myself am the chair of our healthcare subcommittee that's really focused on increasing identification and working on response to potentially trafficked patients. We have a law enforcement working group. They work, to deconflict human trafficking cases and make sure that, the right law enforcement parties working on each case. We have an LGBTQ subcommittee that's been focused on building relationships with key stakeholders in the LGBTQ community, but then also developing LGBTQ sensitivity trainings to human trafficking service providers. And then here are some descriptions here of our victim services subcommittee and our training subcommittee. We get lots of training requests all the time from community members, from police departments, really anyone in between who really want to understand what trafficking looks like in their community and what to do about it and from their position. And so that's what the training subcommittee focuses on. And so, we have a lot going on the task force. And so I want to close with just to talk about a case that was pretty recent that we all kind of came together and worked together on. You can go back to the previous slide really quickly. These are just some of the things that have been accomplished as the task forces work together over time. So these are numbers updated through 2018. But it just goes to show there has been a lot accomplished through collaboration. And so, the example I'm going to give, this was a very recent case. And so this involved a woman, Concepcion Malinik, lived in Cicero. She helped numerous undocumented immigrants from Guatemala into the US between 2009 and 2019. And she ended up pleading guilty to a federal labor trafficking charge. And so that was in April, and her sentencing hearing was fairly recently. So basically, you know, all of these immigrants from Guatemala were residing in her home in Cicero. They worked nearby jobs. I think some of them were employed at a factory. There were adults and minors kind of all staying in this house. And the trafficker, the defendant, Malinik, she basically threatened to contact U.S. immigration authorities if these folks did not pay her a substantial portion of what they were earning. And so the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI were really instrumental in this, and they were assisted by Homeland Security, the U.S. Department of Labor, the Sheriff's Office, CPD was involved, the Chicago Police Department, and then, you know, the follow-up, right? So once kind of, you know, we found out what was happening and the investigation got rolling, you know, Legal Aid Chicago was great in being there to provide assistance to many of these victims. I know that many of them became clients and were able to receive help from Legal Aid Chicago. And then in that, Legal Aid Chicago worked very closely with Heartland Alliance, with our program at Stop It, to make sure that those folks really received the services that they needed and the case management that they needed as they were coming out of this situation. And so it's really one illustration of the success of folks working together. And I think, you know, the benefit of our task force being around for so long is we really have strong relationships with all of the agencies that are involved in anti-trafficking work in some way in the city. And so, yeah, this case was just an example of folks coming together, working together, those relationships really benefiting survivors and making sure that there are better outcomes for survivors. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Shayna. It's such a privilege to get to work with the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force and all of the people involved in it. And yeah, that was a doozy of a case. We had a lot of clients and have been really, really happy to be able to help them get to a much more stable place because of the holistic care that they received. But let's go back to the hypo. As we've gone along, we've talked about sort of all of the services that we can provide, but we haven't really talked about our client as a survivor. So we use victim and survivor interchangeably, but they have been a victim of something that usually causes a lot of trauma. So we know that Antigua is a trafficking survivor. We believe she qualifies for a T visa. We're going to try and get her those benefits. We're connecting her to a social service provider who has helped her with housing, a family law attorney to help her with child custody. And we've connected her to law enforcement. We're like, yeah, we're doing great. But Antigua is forgetting names. She's forgetting dates. Sometimes she tells the story differently. And this is really worrying you, especially because at some point you're going to have to help her report her trafficking to law enforcement. And you want to make sure that her story is told in a way that law enforcement finds credible because you find it credible. But sometimes when you talk to Antigua, all she does is cry. And then other times you will talk to her social worker and you find out that she's telling the social worker different things than she's telling you. And it makes you wonder if she trusts you. This happens a lot with our clients. They're severely traumatized. So back to Janelle to talk about how do you work with a client who is dealing with these things?
So a lot of times when we think about like the first thing that might come to your mind when you think about how someone may be impacted by trauma, you're going to think of psychological issues and kind of like mental health distress. But that, while it does impact the way we work with our clients, I think there are two ways that more impact our clients and the work that we're able to do with them. And the two ways are trust and memory. And so we're going to give a quick overview to kind of talk a little bit about more about memory. I think it's important to have a brief overview of the stress response and how we experience that in our brains and our bodies, because that'll kind of give an explanation of why our memories are impacted. So I'm not a neuropsychologist or a medical doctor, so this is a really brief kind of general overview of how this works. But the stress response is basically your flight or fight or freeze response. And there are three areas of your brain that are impacted. So the amygdala processes all of your emotions. And when you sense danger, the amygdala sends this like danger alarm, danger, danger, we need to respond, go fast, to the hypothalamus, which is like kind of the command center of your brain. And that triggers your nervous system into that fight or flight response. So it makes you, like, gives you that tingly sensation. It lets you like kind of changes your breathing, changes your heart's racing, all of those reactions that we've all experienced in that fight or flight moment is a result of this triggered nervous system response by your hypothalamus. Now, in order for your brain to divert all of its energy in the body to this fight or flight response, it has to divert the energy from somewhere. And that somewhere is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is involved in all of your decision-making, your logic, and your memory. And so when we're in this stress response mode, kind of the memory portion of our brain is shut down, or like energy is greatly being diverted away from it. And so, as you can imagine, when we're in those stressful situations, our memory is going to be impacted. And I think, like, I can think of an example of I was in an accident and the police officer asked me, okay, but exactly where were you when you got hit? And I just couldn't remember. I was like, I remember pushing on the brake. I remember seeing that. And all of a sudden my windshield was broken. And I couldn't really put in those pieces. And I'm sure all of us can think of a moment when we were in a high stress situation and you can't quite put together those pieces. Well, something that's traumatic, like trafficking or other things like domestic violence, sexual assault, those kinds of things have similar impacts on our memory. And so because that's shut down, our memories might not be accessible. They might just not have been saved in the same way. They may be fragmented. I've heard it kind of described that you write out a story on sticky notes and then you try to put them back in order. And it's kind of like, I don't know how this all fits together, which means they might not be in chronological order, someone's memories. They might come back midway through the case. And then another thing that happens with our memory in relation to trauma is dissociation. And dissociation is when your thoughts are disconnected from your feelings, or when you are disconnected from your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and sometimes your sense of identity. And so this is often described as having like an out-of-body experience where you're kind of like a fly on the wall watching what's happening to you. And that's a protective coping mechanism that keeps us emotionally safe. So our body has learned to kind of disconnect ourselves from these dangerous, scary moments as a way to cope. And so, as you can imagine, like if this is kind of a physiological thing that's happening in our body, this is just how our body works. But like Anna explained, when we're talking about credibility or reporting something to law enforcement or really any legal entity, you want things to be in chronological order. You need them to fit together logically to make sense of the case. And our clients are often having to tell their story to multiple different people. Like Anna said, like they have to tell their social worker, they have to tell their attorney, maybe at a clinic, maybe there's all these different, the FBI agent that's doing the investigation. There's all these different people that are involved, and it can be scary if I know I was in this trafficking situation for a few years and not be able to remember things like when, like your child's birthday, or like giving birth to them, or like these big experiences that like because of all this trauma, your memories are just so jumbled up. And so what happens a lot is our clients try to fill in the gaps because it's scary to realize you're missing part of your story. Sometimes they do it intentionally, and sometimes they do it unintentionally, where like they may have just filled in the gaps kind of in the background. And as they're going through their case, some of those come back. And so the memory is one thing that we just try to really reassure our clients, like this is normal for you to have kind of these gaps, and encourage them to just tell us what they remember. And if they don't remember it, that's okay, just let us know. The second way is trust, that our clients are impacted. As you can imagine, again, that our clients have gone through this force, fraud, and coercion with people that are often folks who they trusted at one point in time or another. It could have been a boyfriend. It could have been a family member. Lots of times traffickers are someone that is known to the client, and the trust was completely broken. And so building trust with folks in the future can be extra difficult. And so our role as the professional is to kind of build this trust back with them from the beginning, and giving them full informed consent about what services we can provide. What can they expect from us? What are the time limits? All those kinds of things. Why do we need the information we're asking them for? Who will have access to the information? Is it confidential? They might be like in the hypo, she was very concerned that her trafficker would come and find her and harm her. So can she trust us? Is she safe here? Another thing is like, will she be believed? And then going through these stories, there are like it is triggering to have to remember and relive some of the stuff that she's telling us. And so do we have the patience with her to kind of follow her lead and let her get out the story to the extent that we can in the process? So, and then kind of next, kind of when we're thinking of trauma-informed care, there are 5 different pillars of what we look at. So we've talked a lot about safety. We want Antigua to feel safe both in the physical space that we're meeting in. I think right now we're doing a lot of work remotely, but as we're on the phone, is she physically safe wherever she might be? Does she have privacy that she needs to have some of these phone calls? And then emotional safety, are we giving her the space? Does she have support to be able to process these things and kind of get through it and care for herself? Choices. So again, in trafficking, someone's liberties have been withheld from them. They haven't been able to decide how to use their money. They haven't been able to they haven't had freedom of movement, things like that. And so the legal system is not very trauma informed. A lot of times you don't get a lot of choices. You have to meet deadlines. You have to fit within a very specific system and model. But there are a lot of ways in which we can allow her to make choices and make sure that she's making choices for herself, whether it's we have to cover 3 things in an interview. Where do you want to start? Like even simple things like that can be empowering. And then sometimes there's a better legal outcome that we might be able to achieve if she makes a certain choice. But it's really important that we remember to allow her to look at the pros and cons, look at the potential consequences sometimes of decisions she can make, and allow her to decide that for herself. And kind of treat her as the expert in her own life and the journey that she's on. Another piece is collaboration, encouraging, like kind of reiterating to the client that we're working as a team. We need her involvement, and kind of we're doing this together. Our own trustworthiness, if trust is one of the things that's most impacted by trauma, we as attorneys and social workers and staff working with her have to be trustworthy. We have to show up when we say we will. We have to be consistent and be clear in the expectations we're giving her. And then finally, empowerment. We do that a lot by connecting her with services outside of Legal Aid Chicago to make sure that she's able to become financially stable, to make sure that she's able to have housing, employment, all those kinds of things. And so that's kind of the next piece of how we kind of serve our clients. And so Antigua, throughout this case, what does it look like for her in the future? We've kind of helped her identify a bunch of needs, allowed her to prioritize and then work through those needs with her. She knows she's in charge. And as we've built rapport with her, she's been bringing up new facts and issues that are important to her case and important for us to know. She's been able to stabilize. She's been going to counseling. She's stabilized her housing, and she's receiving some public benefits. She's also working with attorneys to get her in a custody case to get her child back. We've helped her apply for immigration benefits. And so with an immigration status, she's at less of a risk of future trafficking. And so this is kind of an example of some of the cases that we work on and how many different folks and organizations are involved to make sure that she gets kind of this wraparound services of care that she needs. So I'm going to hand it over to Melissa Pachola, who is the director of our volunteer services unit here at Legal Aid Chicago, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of the pro bono opportunities we can offer.
Thank you so much, Janelle. And this presentation did such a wonderful job of highlighting how Legal Aid Chicago is unique in our ability to address the needs of our clients holistically. I'm so impressed by this very important work to assist this population, and I know many of you are feeling the same way I am. As the world starts to return to normal, the needs of our clients will persist, and we will continue to meet their needs holistically. For those of you who may be interested in working alongside us, I'm going to highlight some of the ways that you can get involved in Legal Aid Chicago's work. At Legal Aid Chicago, we have over 20 different volunteer opportunities across the agency. And you can see here that our opportunities run the gamut of skill levels and time commitments. We simply could not do this work without the assistance of our volunteers. And last year alone, over 500 volunteers donated over 10,000 hours working alongside us. We offer a wide variety of opportunities to serve our clients, and you can help us meet their needs. One of our volunteer projects focuses on helping clients get and keep public benefits. We heard from Jose and Anna and Janelle about how public benefits can be essential to helping a client stabilize. This opportunity is appropriate for attorneys and non-attorneys, and we offer comprehensive training, which is available for you to watch whenever you can. Clients benefit from having an advocate beside them, and I promise you, it can be you. These cases are not long-term, they are not time-intensive, and they do not require in-person advocacy, but they are crucial to helping a client get what they need. We're extremely successful at resolving these cases in favor of the client, and the client need exceeds what we can do with our own staff. So the need for volunteers is great, particularly right now. You can find more information about all of our volunteer opportunities on our website, and you're welcome to reach out to me with any questions that you may have about any of our opportunities and how you might be able to help. And with that, I'll turn it back over to John Gallo.
Thank you, Melissa, and thanks to Shana, Anna, Jose, and Janelle for those really fantastic presentations. So that concludes the planned content portion of today's presentation. And as promised, we'll start the Q&A in a moment. Two administrative reminders. If you want to receive CLE credit, click on that link in the chat and fill out the form. And while you're doing that, fill out the survey of the presentation. We've made extensive use of those evaluations in the past, and we're committed to improving the quality of these webinars. So we're going to go to the Q&A, but a reminder, next week's webinar, next Wednesday, we will address the barriers faced by formerly incarcerated persons, whom we now refer to as returning residents. So make sure to block out next Wednesday at noon. So the panelists are now going to remain to answer questions, which you can type into the Q&A, and there's a number of questions there, and Melissa is in charge.
Wonderful, thanks, John. So this is a question about language access, and I'm hoping that actually Anna and Janelle and Jose can all speak to this about what factor does language barrier and access play in these cases, and how do we meet the needs of our clients whose English may not be their first language?
Go for it, Janelle.
I was just going to say, we see that all the time, both within how the traffickers use language access against our clients, where the trafficker, in a lot of the cases I've worked on, the trafficker is fluent in English or has some level of fluency, and the client does not. And we've even seen it where they take our clients to clinics and interpret incorrectly for our clients and to get medical care, and get the medical care they don't need, or prevent them from getting and communicating the needs that they have, just because there is such a limited access to interpretation services. I think people try to get it. It's a pain to use interpreters. It just is. Like, I will fully admit that, but it's so important to make sure that folks can express their needs for themselves. And so we see it definitely in the side of the trafficking. We also see it, and sometimes it's really hard, especially in more remote areas of Illinois, to get client services that they need in their first language. So getting someone Spanish speaking services here in Chicago, you can find it. getting someone an indigenous Guatemalan language therapy in Chicago even, good luck. It's very difficult to find some of the less common languages. And I mean, downstate Illinois, finding even Spanish speaking therapists is very difficult. And so it's definitely a challenge kind of at all levels of the case. And I'm sure you have more to add.
No, you basically answered it all. I think that it's so important to use language line when we can, even in there's been situations where the client speaks English well, but they're also expressing something that is severely traumatic. So I think that it's always worth, if you have the option of using language line, asking your client if they would still like an interpreter, because it might be easier for them to be able to share their full story, even if they are fluent in English in their first language.
Wonderful, thank you both. And Anna, this is a question about some statistics about trafficking survivors. So do you have any information about the gender breakdown of trafficking survivors?
So it is very, very difficult to, trafficking is so underreported. If you look at the Polaris Project, they run the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and they record a lot of the statistics, and they believe that hundreds of thousands of trafficking cases are unreported. We see many, many more sex trafficking cases reported than labor trafficking cases, but we believe that there's actually many more labor trafficking cases than sex trafficking cases. So for example, a 2014 very small study in San Diego did an interview of people working in the region who were not native English speakers and who either had H-2B, H-2A, or other forms of work visas or were undocumented, and 25% of the people interviewed had been in a trafficking-like circumstance. 25%, and it's an insane number. So when you ask about gender breakdown, we don't know. I would say for anecdotally, for Legal Aid Chicago's trafficking survivors, we have slightly more male survivors right now than we do female survivors that we serve. But we also serve a majority of labor trafficking survivors. And so I think if you went to an agency that served more sex trafficking survivors, you might see a different gender breakdown.
Thank you so much. And Jose, this is a very particular question for you, and I guess it's a fun little test. What's the dollar amount that a survivor applicant receives for VTTC food assistance for a family household of 2 people?
It is highly dependent on the exact situation at the moment, and through the pandemic, it's actually changed very often. At the moment, and at least through September, the maximum amount would be $430 for food assistance. But again, that's not guaranteed. That's really only in a family that has absolutely no income. So the actual benefit amount may vary.
Well done, Jose. I think you passed, and I think you get to keep your job. So congratulations. Anna, can you answer, is residency protected pending a T visa application?
So I think what that means is when you put in an application, is a person basically automatically put in a state of deferred action? And no, they're not. I think ICE and Homeland Security has stated that once somebody has a pending application, that person is not a priority for removal. However, we have seen T applicants removed pending their T. And the problem with that is that unlike other visas, if you leave the country after your trafficking, you are no longer eligible for a trafficking visa. So if you are removed, then one of the elements of your eligibility is removed. Just to continue though, once you do get your T visa, you are eligible for to apply for legal permanent residency or your green card. We would apply for a letter for early AOS, for early adjustment of status, which would basically say that the entire inspection process by the legal agency, the law enforcement agency has been completed, and you can apply early, or after 3 years, you can start your application process. And so anybody who has a T is automatically eligible to then apply for their adjustment of status.
Wonderful. And so sort of a follow-up question, Anna, do you have any information on how many of those individuals who we assist with the T visa achieve permanent resident status?
So I can give you some facts that we have about how many people achieved their Ts. In 2019, there were a total of 2,253 applications submitted. This is a very low number. There's 4,000 that are eligible for being granted every year, but only 2,253 people were identified as trafficking survivors. There's just not enough people who know how to identify trafficking survivors and that they're eligible for a T visa. But of that, 991 of the applicants were approved, and 581 were denied. It's actually a significantly larger number were denied last year than the year prior. The year prior, we had 1,279 approvals and only 551 denials. So we don't really know why there is that big difference, but we still have, because USCIS is slowing down in the adjudication process, as of the end of 2019, 4,218 pending T visa applications. So we don't know how many more of those will be granted. And then from that, again, everyone who is approved is eligible to apply to become a legal permanent resident. And from that, they're eligible to apply to become citizens. There are always things that happen in between that could make somebody ineligible. Some sort of inadmissibility, say a crime or a decision that they would like to return to their country of origin. So I don't actually have the statistics on how many people go from a T to a green card.
You had a lot of statistics, so thank you so much for sharing those, Anna. And Janelle, there's a question here about how we you mentioned memory gaps in particular in this population. Can you talk a little bit about how we address when there's a memory gap that we need to fill in to be able to be successful in someone's case? What kind of tools do we have at our disposal to be able to draw on those memories?
So I think there are a lot of things that we can do. I think internally, we don't have the capacity to provide like therapeutic services directly to clients. We refer out. And so what's happened a couple of times where we just feel like a client might not be ready, like whether it's they seem so kind of like with a lot of emotional distress whenever we kind of talk about what has happened, or there's some of these gaps where we'll refer them to go to therapy. And we have some great partners that we can refer them to that are experienced in trafficking and kind of understand what the concerns are, and we'll kind of work with them and give them the time and space they need to come back once they have some more of these gaps filled. And I'm not sure, Anna, I think sometimes we can do, like we've done psychological evaluations with clients, and I know Anna's used those to support. I'm gonna let her kind of explain what that process looks like, but I know that there's sometimes when because there's such an emotional impact on the client that they don't feel comfortable reporting due to kind of the proximity to their traffickers continuing or different things like that, that they're concerned about their safety if they were to report. Sometimes we'll kind of get a psychological evaluation, and Anna can somehow, with her lawyer magic, use that in the application to kind of explain some of the issues, but I will let her explain that part of the process. But I guess if someone's asking about internally, we'll kind of go slowly through the process and see how much we can get out. And Anna and I have done a lot of interviewing together. But if we get to the point and it's like, this is kind of beyond what the services that we can provide, we'll refer out and kind of give them some time to get some more thorough, intensive therapy.
Yeah, it's actually one of the wonderful things about having TVAP providers and of course the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force. I know that Shayna, who's the head of the health task force subcommittee, has gotten many emails asking for referrals for people who can provide psych evals or other medical needs for our clients. And that kind of assistance has been so integral for our clients. I'll let Shayna talk a little more about that.
Yeah, I can speak, I know for the clients that we have at Stop It, like a lot of them, often medical treatment or some type of access to healthcare is an immediate need because that's something they haven't had access to, while they were being exploited. I know one of our first clients I ever met when I was an intern was involved in a domestic servitude situation, and her traffickers had actually withheld blood pressure medication that she needed from her. She also had some vision things going on. So Swedish Hospital, which is a part of our steering committee, I mean, they've been great. They have a violence prevention program, and we work really closely with them for a lot of our clients' medical care. And yeah, I mean, often a psych eval is needed for, some part of a case or needed to kind of clear someone for something. And so, yeah, I get requests like that a lot, or even requests like, I have a client who needs a dentist. They're uninsured and they're not sure what to do. And so things like that. So it's really nice to have this network of service providers to be able to provide that type of information when those things come up.
Great, thank you. And so last call for questions, but we've got at least one more to answer here, which is, Anna in particular, can you speak about sort of long-term effects and follow-up that you do with clients in terms of keeping tabs on them and how they're doing?
So we're really lucky with the TSAP, but we're funded by OVC, and OVC gives us a very sort of broad range to be able to give our clients a very holistic set of services, as we've talked about. And one of that is that we stay with our clients for a really long time. We have clients that have been with us for 10 years, and that can be because it takes a very long time for them to actually get to the point where they're ready to report and where they can actually recount their full story. I have a client who it's taken me 4 years of working with her on other things to get her to the point where she was ready to file for her T visa. She just wasn't ready until she had other priorities taken care of. And throughout that process, we really ask clients what their needs are, what type of engagement they want. And we have some clients where I know Janelle and I have both reached out to them every week. Sometimes we reach out every month, and then we have clients where we file and we say, hey, do you want to hear from us before the tea comes? Nope. And a year to 3 years later, we'll be reaching out to them to say, hey, you got your tea. And they go, great. Okay, we'll talk to you when you're ready to file our AOS, right? They just want the services. So I think it does really depend on the client and what their ask is. And I think that's really important to all of the work we do, that we let the client lead the level of engagement and how long that engagement is. And then something that I know that Janelle will probably be able to respond to better is for those clients who do want more engagement, there is a process of helping them to recognize that once we've provided the legal services that we can, we're not abandoning them, right? There's the clients who don't want anything, and then there's the clients who really start to feel like we are their support network, and how do we help them to make sure that they have a different support network once our capacity to provide these services is done. Janelle, do you want to speak a little more about that?
Yeah, no, I think there are always considerations in kind of, are you making yourself kind of codependent? Like, are you allowing for like a codependent relationship to form where like really the client's just going from their trafficker and now they're doing anything you tell them to do? And so I think that's something that is common, I would say, where like sometimes our clients just don't trust themselves to make decisions because they've been taught that they shouldn't. And so that's where this empowerment really comes in, of how can we make sure that we're not becoming like their only source of support, and how can we make sure that they're building some support outside of us that's more long-term. Because like Anna said, like the legal case has there's a timeline. They can be up to 3 years, right? Like it might be a long time that they're working with them, but eventually it's going to end. And so I think we're not doing our job fully empowering them if we're kind of making them dependent on us in other ways. And so, so yeah, just like making sure that they're connected with services and building their own support network beyond Legal Aid Chicago is definitely going to have long-term benefits for the client.
Great. And so Jose, this is a question for you. When does the family stop getting the VTTC benefits? I think I said too many T's. How will they know that the client is no longer eligible for the benefits so that the beneficiary is no longer eligible?
With benefits through the public aid office in general, the client has a responsibility to report changes as they happen to the public aid office. So either at the time that that they have to renew their benefits, or as they happen, depending on the individual situation. So when someone gets approved for T visa, generally they simply have to let DHS know that they have been approved for the T visa. At that point, they'll do their work and transfer it over to federal benefits. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, but we can always help with reporting all those changes.
Great. And are there, this is for mainly Anna, is there a timeline or a time limit on when you can report trafficking?
So there is not a legally defined timeline, but the further you get away from the trafficking, so one of the elements of trafficking is that you have to be present on account of the trafficking. So the further you get away from trafficking, the more stable you become in your life, the more other things you build up in your life, so that the trafficking is not a core element in why you are still in the United States, the harder it is for you to meet the element of present on account of. So we have clients who were trafficked 16 years ago, and we're currently trying to, we're in a discussion with USCIS about why the fact that they only just found out they are survivors of trafficking, and therefore only just were able to access the services that would help them address that trauma, means that they are still here on account of the trafficking, because they still need all of those services that are available only to trafficking survivors, and that are really uniquely available in the United States in many cases, and in big cities. And I got emailed a question from a colleague, Melissa, so I'm just gonna answer it really quickly.
Go for it.
He's just wanting to know how many victims of T's do we think are in Cook County, and then versus Illinois, versus outside Illinois, versus outside of the US. And I just want to say, I don't know, because the numbers remain so, like, it's just so hard to estimate. But I will say that for our part, most of our trafficking survivors are non-citizens, and so most of them originally are from outside the United States. But again, I think a lot of that is because of our specialty, and because we deal mainly with labor trafficking. And so I do think that there are a lot more anecdotally. I don't know if this is held up by the statistics, and I can't find any statistics to support or not support it. Anecdotally, when we get sex trafficking survivors, they tend to be citizens. Labor trafficking survivors tend to be non-citizens. And I think that some of that has to do with the way that labor trafficking happens, and the way that our H-2B, H-2A system is currently set up to really make people very vulnerable to those kinds of abuses. So we see a lot of people from outside the US, but all of our survivors either live in Cook County or in broader Illinois currently.
Great, and that concludes the questions that we have gotten.
Melissa, thank you for fielding those questions and to all of our teammates for responding. Thanks to all of you for sticking it out to 121. We'll see you next week at noon. We appreciate your participation. Thanks to all the presenters.